should go down and then you go up. Make it better, make it better. Down on the ground, there's just one way up. Make it better, make it better. If you stand by me, I will stand by you. To make it better, make it better.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Rise Up with Rebecca Seawright on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, serving the Upper East Side, Yorkville, and Roosevelt Island, hosting tonight from my East 79th Street neighborhood office. Tonight, we will be talking about emergency preparedness and the unprecedented storms, Henry and Ida, and the response. The remnants of Hurricane Ida poured record rain into New York City, creating flooding in all 5 boroughs and causing the tragic loss of lives in New York City. We are grateful for the heroic efforts of our emergency responders and everyday New Yorkers who were on the scene and continue to assist residents and businesses in the aftermath of the storm. We were pleased to hear that President Biden approved an emergency disaster declaration for New York following the devastation caused by Tropical Depression Ida and its unprecedented historical rainfall. On the Upper East Side, almost all of the flooding witnessed was on the FDR Drive. This is the second storm in less than 30 days where rain records were broken in Central Park for the levels of rain recorded in a single hour. These are reminders that we must take actions to protect our environment and prepare for the increased severity of storms. As a member of the Assembly and the Environmental Legislative Caucus, I'm dedicated to fighting for environmental reform in our state. Legislation I introduced requiring the Commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to implement rules and regulations that require the placement of air quality monitoring equipment at waste transfer stations in New York State was successfully passed. I'm proud to be an environmentalist legislator, earning a 100% rating on the New York League of Conservation Voters Environmental Scorecard recently released. In June of 2019, we passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA, in the Assembly, the nation's most progressive climate justice legislation. Now, we are fighting to pass the Climate and Community Investment Act, CCIA, which would provide the funding mechanism to make the goals of the CLCPA a reality. Essentially, the Climate and Community Investment Act takes money from corporate polluters and invests it in our communities. 1/3 of all money raised, about $15 billion a year, will go to community-based organizations in frontline communities to fund local programs such as community-owned solar and local distributed renewables efficiency for homes, schools, and community facilities. Adaptation programs, additional funds available to fossil fuel workers and host communities. It is clear that these are just the first steps to combating climate change in New York State, our nation, and around the world. Joining me are 2 leaders in the emergency response and security fields. Today, we have the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services Commissioner Patrick A. Murphy, who completed over 41 years of military service with his final assignment as the Director of the National Guard Bureau Joint Staff at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. He previously served as the Principal Staff Officer to the Chief National Guard Bureau in an oversight role of over 450,000 National Guard soldiers and airmen. We are also joined by Andrew D'Amora, the First Deputy Commissioner for New York City. He serves in the New York City Emergency Management Department as deputy. Most recently, he served as chief of staff at the New York City Emergency Management Department, acting as strategic advisor and counsel to the New York City Emergency Management Commissioner and overseeing programming initiatives for the city agency. As chief of staff, he managed a New York City deployment in support of the city of San Juan, Puerto Rico during the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. and coordinated the agency's response to events ranging from summer heat waves to building collapses. We have a few questions that have come in from constituents and others, and we wanted to just kind of lead off with an opening from both of you and also then go on to our Q&A roundtable. So Commissioner Murphy, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, Assemblymember, thank you so much for the awareness of preparedness, emergency management, response in the communities that you serve every day. I would start out by saying New York City, Andy and John Scrivani and the whole team at New York City Emergency Management are great partners with us. We're together every day in trying to protect and help New Yorkers in what we do. You're calling to attention of the issues that we've most recently had with some heavy rains and record rains, I think lends itself to the opportunity to do more preparedness activities. And I think as you see us move forward, we will continue that process with an eye towards the climate change that's going on. It's real. And our constituents, the people that we serve, are experiencing it unfortunately in ways that are not beneficial to their everyday lives. And so we will continue to prepare, and when needed, respond and work through the recovery as well. So thank you for bringing this to people's attention.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And we appreciate all your expertise and your dedicated service to the state. And Deputy Commissioner DeMora.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, everybody. Just as Pat said, first I'd like to thank Pat all these years, especially during COVID, being a great partner, the state, just helping us out through all of that, and even with the weather events. But I think he's absolutely right. The climate change, it's just, all these unexpected type of storms that have been happening in more frequency. So that's, a lot of lessons learned along the way. And so even with today, we have a flash flood watch the National Weather Service has put out, and we're leaning forward, even if something that's not anticipated to be a real large event like we've thought in the past. We're going to take proactive action by getting agencies out there, doing more catch basin cleaning, really messaging people, especially in low-lying areas, to be prepared, know the forecast, and just be on alert to know these surroundings and what might happen, so you're ready and prepared to take action.
Well, thank you, Deputy Commissioner DeMora. We appreciate your service to New York City and sharing your expertise with us today. Moving on to questions, there were reports of more than 3 inches of rainfall per hour with the last storm. As these extreme weather is becoming more frequent in New York City, what preemptive measures are being considered when it comes to extreme weather?
Let me give maybe a more overarching response, and then Andy can be a little more specific maybe to the area that you serve. And that is, number one, the coordination that occurs as we see these storms roll in, even though it may not be predicted to be at the level of 3 inches per hour, which in fact was not predicted in the last storm in Ida that we experienced. I think we've done a number of things to be able to support those that would need additional resourcing. And so those coordination calls that we have, the watching the National Weather Service and the analysis of what could be there, as well as looking at what we have positioned currently to be able to respond, and also what we need to reposition to be able to respond. So I would just say, as we think about what's potentially coming in the current storms, it's paying attention to the Weather Service. It's looking at what we have and pre-positioning additional assets as needed. Andy?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, just piggybacking off that with the National Weather Service, we also, take a look at other vendors, have our own meteorologists to really fine tune the forecast, to give us the best information possible. So we could put out messaging as stated earlier. And we do that with our Notify NYC program in 14 different languages. So we're making sure that folks are really getting those messages, and obviously relying on elected officials to help us push those messages out, especially to our most vulnerable populations in the city.
Great. Well, thank you. And as elected officials, we're certainly happy to try to get that information out quickly to our email blasts and through social media, and here at our storefront office on the Upper East Side. There was major flooding of many subway stations, which affected the commute home for many commuters. What do you recommend that commuters do in a flash flood emergency? Are there any preemptive measures that commuters can take with regard to their daily commute on the subway to and from work, or medical appointments for our seniors?
Well, before, I would definitely check mta.info. I always give that advice. So check your app, check to make sure the trains are running on time if there's any issues. If you happen to be on the train when something does happen as an emergency, listen to the instructions of the train crew, first responders, the old transit cop in me, never go on the tracks. It's, that's the last thing you want to do. Power will still be on. So we want to make sure we're getting instruction from the train crew and first responders if there needs to be some sort of evacuation. Another point, if you are commuting, maybe there's, if your office still allows teleworking, if you, before and after the storm, so you're not in the middle of the storm, taking mass transit or, driving or even walking.
Yeah, and I would just follow up with kind of compliment what Andy just said, and that is whether it's the rain we're having now or potential snowfall as we go into the winter time, the travel can be treacherous in some of these events, and so having a plan and having alternate routes or alternate means of transportation as a thought. Some it may not be possible for some, and so it's being preemptive on your travel planning, or our recommendation would be, once it starts to occur, is to stay in place, shelter in place, because there is nothing good happens when we start to flood the roadways or we get so much rain that our systems will not handle it. There's very few cars that make it through a flooded area. And more than likely, that flooded area is going to flood even more, given the amount of rain. And so it's either move ahead or hold off and wait, so that first responders can take care of other emergencies versus you becoming the emergency yourself.
I would just add to that if we're looking at any opportunity, like we have to limit travel or travel bans, we will work closely with Pat and the state to really coordinate that. And even with messaging, certain subway lines that might be closed or certain roadways that might be closed. So.
Well, that is excellent advice. Thank you both. It's just so important in these unpredictable times to be prepared. There's no substitution for preparation, whether it's an emerging snowstorm or tropical rainstorm. And so that leads me to my next question. As we confront new climate challenges, do you have recommendations to our viewers on how to be prepared for unpredictable weather conditions? They say stock up on water in your house for storm and groceries and staples, but what should we do as just everyday commuters out there? Is there something that we can have on us and carry when we don't know that there's going to be a flash flood and we haven't done what you've advised, which is pay attention to news media and listen to our transit cops, especially some people travel with their headphones on and with their favorite music, and so they're not aware of what different media platforms are putting out there. Is there something that we can do just every day that we have on us to be prepared?
And I'll just jump in first, kind of from a planning perspective, knowing that there are extreme weather conditions. Obviously, we're not going to go from, in this case with a weather event, we're not going to go from a bright sunny day, typically, to a few minutes later having a flooding condition. So there's some indications. And so those indicators that we get, which is a quick look outside sometimes, then it's time to look at those sources of information that we've got available to us. I know Annie and the city communicate on many different levels to be able to get information out. But Assemblymember, you're exactly right. People have to pay attention to those indicators as we go forward. I know the state will continue to push out messages using the resources that we have as well. But it kind of goes back to the planning again. What's a plan if in fact you would have this? As kids and with our parents, did we have a plan to evacuate the house if we had a fire? It seems so basic, but it is absolutely true.
Right.
What is the plan that in case you would have bad weather, depending on where you're at? And especially if it's moving from a residence to work or work to the residence, I don't think you could overplan.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, an emergency plan tailored to your family. Every family is unique. You want to make sure that, you know where you could relocate to or be in touch with certain relatives, having those contact numbers. And really, just to bring it back though, even though some people might not pay attention, it's important, the education piece, whether it's from the city, the elected officials, really putting out those messages. And one way you could do that, even with extreme weather, is nyc.gov/severe weather. It's a great site. And also, we keep reiterating this, but obviously Notify NYC is a key partner to know your surroundings and the latest information. And when you're talking about coastal events, it's important to know if you live in one of the 6 evacuation zones in the city. And that also could be found at nyc.gov, know your zone. So all these different tools that we have just give people situational awareness and really know beforehand, as Pat said, the planning piece is critical in these weather events.
Excellent. Well, thank you. That's so important. And I can't wait to check out nyc.gov to see the 6 evacuation zones. And we'll put that information out to our viewers. That's very important. We have constituents that live in walk-ups and high rises. Are there any special tips for senior citizens or those who are living with disabilities to ensure that they can access things like that they rely on for electricity and medical equipment and prescription drugs?
Yeah, I'll just take it at the local level first. So we just talked about planning. That still holds true, even as a senior if you're disabled. If you have a home health aide or a caregiver, it's important for them to know that plan as well. This way they'll know how to react, whether it's a fire or a weather event. You'll know what to do, working with the building if you're in a tenement or something. Another thing is if you're on any life-sustaining equipment or you need assistance with oxygen, very important to register that with Con Edison or utility provider. This way you'll get, if power does go out, they'll know exactly where you are. They'll prioritize you getting service back, and they'll actually check on you to make sure that you're okay. And and also they'll make sure the police department gets notification if they're not able to reach you. So you'll get a knock on the door, make sure you're okay. And obviously first responders would come if the power is going to be a prolonged outage.
A couple more things that those folks could do is oftentimes there's medications that are involved, making sure that they have a 5 to 10 day supply potentially because of the inability to move around to get access. Do they have a, as Andy said, a caregiver or somebody that is checking in on them? But the other piece is then after the storm, it's important to have documents that you may have otherwise lost in one of these events. And we're seeing this now with Ida. We need some documents to be able to help provide support. And so safeguarding documents and waterproof areas, that type of thing, complement as well. And then I don't think we could overemphasize just looking out for each other in these cases, looking at your neighbors. And I think many of the saves during Ida were neighbors taking care of neighbors as well. And so those tenements and those living areas need to be watched carefully.
Well, thank you. That's excellent. And, you know, it's just so important. New Yorkers are strong. We survived 9/11 and Storm Sandy, and we're surviving the pandemic. So it is so important to check on our seniors, our loved ones, and our neighbors. And New York is so resilient and bouncing back. And preparation and planning, there's just no substitute for that. And you mentioned, Deputy Commissioner, about advising the utility company and the police. And if you're having trouble getting through, if the line is busy, please call your elected official's office. Our number is 212-288-4607. And I encourage you to put down your local council person's number, your local assembly person, your state senator, your congressional rep at the federal level. Put their numbers on your refrigerator. And if you have an emergency and you're having trouble getting through to the police or a utility company, call our office and we'll help intervene and get you assistance. Our next question, what kind of coordination takes place with community centers to give advanced guidance for storm preparation?
So we work with the Department of the Aging, DFTA, and Youth and Community Development and Immigration Affairs to really put out messaging. We have something called advanced warning system. So we would put out any forecasts, any kind of hazards, from an all hazards approach, really, if something is happening, whether it's summer heat or a storm or winter weather, put that out, making sure that folks are prepared, getting those messages out. Folks who are on special, if they're getting Meals on Wheels or something, we'll make sure that they get an extra meal for the day or for the weekend, make sure that they're taken care of. So that's one of the key ways. And also we're working with CBOs. We have a community engagement division that is working closely with community groups and to really expand on the planning and preparedness piece. So communities could take ownership as well and really plan, because they know the people in their community, and the trust factor is there as well. So they're familiar with the people who are leading these CBOs. And I think that's a great strategy to really have the preparedness grow in the whole city as a whole.
Great. And our next and final question, is there anything that our state legislature can do? I sit on the Ways and Means Committee, and we hear budget requests from the city and state of our wonderful agencies. And so other than funding, we always need more funding for different programs and initiatives. But is there anything that you see the state legislature doing to be more helpful or supportive?
Yeah, so I think, you know, as we work with our elected officials throughout all the communities across the state, and specifically to yours, Assemblymember, is really that ongoing open line of communication. We know that it's there. You've and this is an example today of that open line of communication that we have with you and your peers. Just as you have encouraged your constituents to communicate back and forth with your office, we do the same thing. And I would want your viewers to know that that line of communication is always open with you, and you are their best advocate in many cases because you're closest to what their needs and wants are. And so that communication is key. Your advocacy is appreciated, and that passing of information back and forth occurs on a regular basis. And so thanks for asking. And I think the biggest thing we can do is continue to have that ongoing dialogue.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. The lines of communication are open between us, all elected officials, really. And just to keep pushing, amplifying our messaging, we amplify yours. For folks to really join Notify NYC to have those latest updates of what's going on in the city. And they could do that by going to nyc.gov or calling 311. So that would be a big help as well.
Okay, very good. Well, it's time for our wrap up, and I want to thank both of you for your expertise and on this so relevant topic. The New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services Commissioner Patrick A. Murphy, and Deputy First Commissioner Andrew D'Amora, New York City Emergency Management Department. And I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in. for Rise Up with Rebecca Seawright. We invite you to tune in for our next show on the homeless population in New York State. Thank you.
First you go down.